Today's show brought to you by the In the Money free newsletter and In the Money Plus. We want you to check these things out. Lots of great extra Derby content you'll have access to and a chance to get all the stuff we're creating at inthemoneypodcast.com on a silver platter, basically. The free newsletter, you sign up inthemoneypodcast.com/email. And if you want even more than that, we're going to have a bunch of added content around the Derby, extra podcasts, extra written content, and all year long, you get extra stuff as well as little digests with picks from all the shows. That's inthemoneypodcast.com/plus. Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Friday, April 22nd. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatow. Happy to be here with you from the Brooklyn Bunker once again, and happy to be joined by a man who helps me kick off so many of these shows this year. You know him from his own eponymous podcast, from his work on NBC. He is TV's Matt Bernier. Matt, what's going on, man?
You know it's Derby and Oaks season when like probable PPs are coming out weeks in advance with all the horses in there, and you can take a look and see how the figs stack up, who's going to be positioned where. You know, I think that's what part of what makes this time of year so fun, and that's what we'll talk about a little bit here.
The Kentucky Derby pace has been a hotly contested topic already. Obviously, a lot more information to come. The post position draw is going to matter. The final composition of the field obviously is going to matter. But I do think we can talk about it in general terms. It's amazing when you look at the list of, well, let's call it first past the post horses in the Kentucky Derby since the advent of the point system. You just haven't been able to be much further back than a couple of lengths at those first calls and past the post first in the Kentucky Derby. Is that a trend we're expecting to continue this year?
I mean, I think so. You know, and I know some folks have brought up, I had a commenter on my show earlier this week suggest, well, maybe there just haven't been quality closers in some of these other renditions of the race. And my argument would be that that's entirely plausible. But regardless, if you have good quality dirt horses with early speed, they're just always going to have the upper hand on good quality closers because they're going to have too much work to do, and they're going to need to get lucky from a trip standpoint. So I really expect nothing different this year. I'd be stunned if we had any kind of a pace meltdown, and I expect the horses that are forwardly placed to be prominent again as they turn for home.
Another thing I'll note about the pace historically in these last few years, it ain't all horses walking on the lead. You go back and you look at the splits that a horse like Justify set. If you look at something like the Racing Flow numbers, he's not supposed to be able to hang on there. So there, you know, I do believe that not having the sprinters in there like we had, that you could argue undid a horse like Point Given. I feel like a Fleet Alex is a horse that comes to mind, maybe that was undone by
Bodemeister.
Yeah, there are plenty of them that got undone chasing these paces, but it's not like to impugn the quality of any of the winners since. It's just the way that the races have unfolded. You will so often see, though, with jockeys. Here's an example of it from last year's Breeders' Cup. They and this is just very human. I'm not looking to knock riders here, but you will sometimes see an overreaction to a narrative or an overreaction to what just happened. And when you look at the results from the Breeders' Cup, the big pace meltdown in the distaff, followed by a race that on paper I thought had the potential to melt down in the Classic, then going at a dog walking type of a pace. That's not uncommon to me, where the riders become aware of something and then they overcorrect. And there's part of me, and it's probably the part of me that wants to be backing the Remsen Exacta of Mo Donegal and Zandon, that's wanting that to happen, that's wanting riders to say, wait a second, every year it's the horses that are, in the top flight that are there at the end. I'm going to be in the top flight this year. And I don't know, I'm hoping that we get at least a fair shake in terms of the pace for horses like Mo Donegal and Zandon, who are coming from far back. At the same time, I am demanding, if it was just a race and I liked a horse as much as I like Mo Donegal, for example, I'd probably be happy to bet him at, I don't know, 4-1, 5-1 type of a price. The question of the pace makes me want, 6-1, 8-1 at least. I think we'll get all of that, but I mean, I am factoring it in. But I guess my you already said you don't necessarily see it as a meltdown. But do you see where I'm going with this? Is it possible that the riders themselves will dictate that this becomes a race where the later paced runners can finally get involved?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, look at the distaff in the Classic. On paper going in, they were, if we're being honest, they were effectively the same scenario where you had a horse that was more or less need the lead type. And if they got headed, they weren't going to go on. And you saw everybody and their brother go in the distaff, and we saw what happened there. And we saw no one go in the Classic, and we saw what happened there. Maybe you get somewhere in the middle here. I guess for me, the difference is in this year's Derby anyway, I don't know that you have any one of the early speeds that is dependent on it. And I mean, when I say that, I mean of the quality speeds, the ones I expect to be around late, whether it's Epicenter, whether it's Messier, whether it's Taiba, I could go on. White Abario even has a little bit of early foot. None of them are absolute need the lead confirmed front runners. And I think that could change the dynamic a little bit simply because, okay, if someone else is really intent or hell-bent on going, so be it. We'll sit. We're okay with that. We're not a horse that has to go. I mean, let's go back to last year's Derby. I think the thing that was, I'm going to assume John Velasquez knew Medina Spirit was the kind of horse that needed to go. And you know what? He's going to dig in and fight you for all he's got. They said, we're going to go on with it. I don't think you have to worry about that with any of the main early types in this year's race. And again, it's not to suggest that this thing won't come apart at the seams. Maybe the early pace doesn't end up being off the charts, but maybe that interior portion of the race heats up when they really start racing as we go into the far turn, sort of that third quarter, I guess, of the race. If that's the case, then you could certainly see some of these horses from a little bit farther off of it coming and making a move. I will also throw something out there that I kind of dismissed, but I had a listener kind of pointed out in one of my shows. I was talking about Zandon and Mo Donegal. To me, they are the two best finishers in the race. My concern is trip. Again, you've got to work out some sort of a in-out kind of deal or whatever it may be, or you got to give up ground and you need to get some pace. Someone suggested that there's a chance that Zandon may not be as far back as he was in the Bluegrass. And when you take a look at pace figures, and I just compared Epicenter's Louisiana Derby to Zandon in the Bluegrass, they were actually very, very comparable. So it does make me wonder, either maybe Epicenter's farther back than I thought he would be, or maybe Zandon's closer than I thought he would be. It's a fascinating dynamic. And really, I guess it depends. When does the race begin? Do they go for broke from the minute the gates break, or do things start to heat up in that sort of middle portion of the run? Because we've seen premature moves. Boy, that's fine. You get in position, that final eighth of a mile, that can be a long road to run.
There's a lot to unpack as far as all this stuff goes. I mean, I definitely think that the jockey musical chairs business with Rosario, who did such a good job on Mo Donegal in the Wood, I hope it's a mistake as someone who's bet Mo Donegal, but I can also say, understandably, sticking with Epicenter. What effect is that going to have? I mean, in a way, even though, and I don't mean to knock Irad Ortiz at all, I'm a big fan of Rosario, and you had to love what he did with Mo Donegal in the Wood. But in a way, maybe having Irad Ortiz up is going to actually be beneficial, and maybe similar to the point you were making with Zandon, you'd have to go back and cherry pick through Mo Donegal pace figures to make him much closer to the pace. But does he have to necessarily be so far back? I mean, a lot of his being far back early was not breaking. It doesn't have much in the way of early speed, but from an outside gate, maybe could he try to get position and be more like 7 lengths back early as opposed to 12, and maybe that could be seen to a positive effect. And then there's the question of Rosario on Epicenter and what that's going to mean. We think of Rosario as patient and a finisher, but he's also somebody who's had plenty of success when he does decide to go to the front end. And funny enough, my least favorite ride for Rosario is probably a stalking long dirt race. I kind of want to see him farther back or on the lead. So let's talk about the jockey musical chairs. What kind of trip, if you just had to guess, what kind of trip are you expecting from those two horses, Mo Donegal and Epicenter, with their riders?
To me, Mo Donegal is even more so than Zandon, he is a closer. I say closer. He's an off the pace type. He's not going to come from last, but I think his greatest asset is his stamina, and he's going to run all day. I can't imagine him being that close, and I can try to do it on the fly and pull up, see what his pace figs have looked like throughout his career. But I know I had a lot of people go back to that Remsen and they say, look, both of them were really close. If you use the Timeform US pace figs, I mean, they were crawling out there. Someone had to be close.
Slow.
Yeah, they were in the 90 range. I mean, you would expect a half-mile Timeform US kind of pace fig to be, I don't know, 125, 130 for the Kentucky Derby. I mean, if that is the case, these guys are going to be much farther back than maybe we think that they could possibly be. I don't, but again, for a horse like Mo Donegal, frankly, I don't care. I think he's the type that he's going to run at the end no matter what. It's just a matter of, is he going to get the trip that he needs? Zandon, I guess, fits the same bill. Epicenter, though, is the one that, with Rosario aboard and the draw, I've gone on record. Outside of the one hole, I don't really care. I know they're going to come over. I know it's not the most comfortable position, but I mean, look, if you draw perfectly and you miss the break, it doesn't make a difference where you drew. I wonder if this does look on the murkier side, and maybe it doesn't look like we have any true confirmed gas. I wonder, knowing everything with this horse, with Rosario, with Steve Asmussen looking for his first Derby, I wonder if the instructions are go to the front. Come and catch me. He's won at 1 mile and 3/16. He's the only U.S.-based horse that has done that. The other horses have won at 1 mile and 8, and that's all well and good. But he has won at the longest distance so far for a prep as far as the U.S.-based horses are concerned. He's won on the lead in multiple races. I don't think you get cute. I think you just say, screw it, we're going. We're going to break. If he breaks sharp, say, we're going to the front, and you got to run us down.
I think it makes a lot of sense. But the problem with that is when you look at the pace figures he's run to date, he hasn't run fast enough to do that. So that might create what I know our buddy Sean Borman calls like a difficult situation essentially for him, because will that going faster early take the sting out of his finish that he's shown when he's able to control? I mean, he's controlled soft paces. He hasn't. I mean, I like the horse, but at the price he's going to be, I think I'm going to be moderately against, because I feel like one way or the other, he's going to have to do something different than what he's done before. He's either going to have to come, if he runs his normal pace figure, he's going to come from further back, or he's going to run a faster pace figure, and then is he going to be able to finish? I mean, look, every horse has questions, but in a race where I like a few other runners, I'm just filled with a tiny little bit of skepticism about him, even though I agree with you that, especially with Rosario, who, again, I tend to like to see him going long on the dirt, especially coming from farther back or just on the lead. And, he does both of those rides really well. Will Epicenter be able to be shown to his best effect doing that, though?
To your point, the only time of his Derby preps anyway that he earned a pace fig north of 120 early on was his loss in the Lecomte. Now, I think context needs to be sort of brought in there, because in that Lecomte, he was the only horse that was doing any running early that was around late. Everybody else is still running right now. So
it was a good race.
And the Louisiana Derby is very much, from a pace fig standpoint, on par with his Risen Star, on par with his Gun Runner. The difference is he was a length and a half off the pace running like that in the Louisiana Derby, as opposed to being out on the lead. I guess it is one of those things too. The Derby, year in and year out, there's at least one horse that really touts themselves leading into the race. And I know, it's become kind of a joke, and it's true. Oh, everybody says they couldn't be doing better. They couldn't be doing better. There is always that one horse, though, that seems like they're touting themselves, saying it's go time. It was Mandaloun last year. We've seen it in years past, whether it's, I go way back with Orb. He was kind of the talk of the talk. Animal Kingdom, the year that he won, he was the bee's knees as far as the morning workouts were concerned. And typically all of those horses, they at least give a good account of themselves, even if they don't win. I'll be curious to see who that is that week leading into the Derby, because there's going to be at least one darling of the clockers that basically stamps themselves as a player, even if you didn't really think about them going into the race.
I think you're right. And there's a lot of candidates to be that horse. A lot of good workhorses going to be descending on the grounds at Churchill if they're not there already. Let's talk about some other horses who are likely to be a part of this pace, starting with the horse that I think will probably make the lead if he breaks. And we sometimes see these horses coming from other jurisdictions in America, and for whatever reason, they don't break. But I'm talking about Summer is Tomorrow. I mean, this is a horse with legit sprint speed. They were sounded like they were a bit on the fence about running, and they've decided to run him. I think if you're going to take your horse with sprint form and try him in a race like the Kentucky Derby, you got one way to go. And if this horse breaks, I expect him to be the leader at the first call. I do not expect him to be there at the end, but I think he could make things a little bit tricky on Rosario if they do decide just to dead send with a horse like Epicenter. What do you think of my theory of him being the early pace setter?
Well, and keep in mind, if that ends up playing out, I think it's going to be one of those things where if Epicenter breaks and their plan is to go, and you see this horse being quarter horsed out of there to make the front, you say, fine, we're going to let him go. I almost
he's
wonder
not in the race,
correct.
Flip outside and just do your thing.
You approach him as if he's really not even in the race, and you say he's going to stop at some point. Basically, do we want to be second just off of him, which effectively would be first in the race? Or do we really just want to be out there in front of everyone else? And at that point, you got to determine how fast you're going early. But no, I personally, and maybe I'm not giving the horse enough credit, but I'm approaching it as if Summer is Tomorrow is not part of the race.
When you look at pace figures, you and I have looked at different sets of pace figures, and we came up with the same conclusion that just looking at numbers, these California horses, Messier and Taiba, look like they're both capable of being on or near throughout. I've said that Messier, to me, in a way, has a little bit of a Medina Spirit look of a horse who I think their best chance is just going to be to dead send. And, I can't tell you why Taiba isn't supposed to run him down again the way he ran him down last time, but it's a 20-horse field. And if it ends up being too much too soon for Taiba, if Taiba gets in trouble, maybe Messier just keeps on going on the front end. I think he's, if he's a 15-1 shot, he's somebody I think I'd want to include as a potential best speed to either be on the engine or in a similar position, sitting just off a runner like Summer is Tomorrow, especially if they decide to do some sort of, mid-pack tactics on Epicenter. I think that would obviously potentially redound to Messier's benefit. How do you see him being ridden? Do you think he's good enough to have a say in the outcome?
Yeah, look, to be honest, I thought Messier's runner-up in the Santa Anita Derby was the best race he's run so far. I wasn't fully all in. I wasn't totally a believer. I thought that Bob Lewis was purely a product of the racetrack, where he rode a conveyor belt and he won by 100 lengths. He did regress, but it was not substantially. And I thought he ran really, really well at Santa Anita a couple weeks ago. And I think he fits in here really well. And purely from a fig standpoint, from a pace figure standpoint, you understand why there's a real chance that, I mean, I don't know that I would have thought this going into the race, but the two California horses could potentially be 1-2. I mean, we just talked about Epicenter. He's only got one race where his early figs are up over 120. In that Santa Anita Derby, the first pace fig for Messier was 132. For Taiba, it was 130. I think if that ends up happening, you could be looking at the exacta, because from a talent standpoint, I've said it, Taiba, I think, is just a freak of nature. I had some people questioning the idea of, oh, well, you only saying this because it was a former Baffert horse, and if it was any other trainer, would you be looking at Taiba as a legitimate contender? I would say, when you see horses do uncommon things, you have to take note. You can't just completely ignore that. And for this horse to go as fast early as he did, then take a little bit of a breather, I'm just going to rattle off his pace figures. 130, 124, 120. Seems like he's going the opposite direction. Then he goes to 122, 126. So he actually did one of these. I think he gets stronger as the race goes on. And again, it's purely a matter of, is this too much too soon for a horse like this? I have no doubt that the talent is there. But I guess long-winded way of saying, again, California has a strong hand.
No doubt about it. One other point on Messier, that was his first race too last time since February.
Yeah.
There is a real world in which you see a move forward for him. And as for Taiba, I mean, I think you put it very well. I mean, the brilliance that he showed, you can't find too many horses who've been as brilliant through 2 starts. I mean, I think figure wise, he's on a par with, if not exceeded, Justify's first 2 starts, and Justify's second race was an allowance race. So I mean, to do what he did in a grade 1, granted the favorite, well, not the, yeah, he was the favorite. Forbidden Kingdom didn't show, but still to do what he did with Messier, he can't be ruled out. He will not be on the pace, but I think he will certainly be forward. A couple of other runners who I think should be in this early pace conversation. One is a horse who was the best speed in the wood, and as we talked about in our Monster Pod video, wasn't exactly laying down late early voting, but you said from the pace figures you were seeing, he's not necessarily going to be able to be on the lead if he wanted to be. And there's a lot of talk he's going to pass the race and go to the Preakness anyway.
I just think he would need to go so much faster than he did in the Wood Memorial, and kind of the way I laid it out when we talked about the race. I don't know. I fail to see a scenario or a reason why all of a sudden he would be able to beat Mo Donegal at Churchill, given the way everything played out in the Wood. Now, to be fair, you take a look at the Wood pace figs, early voting went 128, 127, 125. So by no means was he crawling out there. That should put him forward. You take a look at some other products out there, they have him considerably farther back early on. I personally think early voting, it's a prime opportunity to sit out the Derby, let the chips fall where they may. Anybody that wheels back in 2 weeks, it's going to be a quick turnaround. You're going to have a fresh horse. You're going to have a horse that could very well be outright on the lead. And as far as the new shooters are concerned, I mean, I would take my chances with Chad Brown and Clairere stables going into a race like the Preakness. They've done it before with cloud computing. That would be my call if I was involved with the horse. I would say, you know what, the Derby's nice. Let's wait. Let's go get the Preakness.
I've got a sneaky idea of a horse who could be part of the early pace that I haven't heard many people talk about. He did not break in the Florida Derby, but he's won in wire fashion before, and I think is likely to show more. If things go well in the Kentucky Derby, is likely to show more speed. He's got an uncoupled stablemate in Mo Donegal, who's a deep closer. What about Charge It as a wise guy idea to be part of this Derby pace?
Well, so he's kind of a wild card in general for me, simply because I'm afraid that it's too much too soon for a horse that when I watch that Florida Derby, it looks like he needs experience. He looks like he's a little bit on the green side still. Having said that, you take a look at the pace figs from that Florida Derby. I mean, all the horses went fast early on. I don't know how that translates to Churchill Downs. I personally didn't like the finish from any of them at Gulfstream. I thought they were all kind of tired at the very end of it, and you understand why. But the reality is you're probably going to need to go that fast again the first Saturday in May and have some kind of a finish. Charge It to me still feels like, look, I'm going to sit him out in the Derby. Put it this way. It's not because I don't believe in him. It's because I think he's the kind of horse that needs a little bit of seasoning. I personally would have preferred to see a path sort of Peter Pan to Belmont and then Travers over the summer. Who knows? Maybe he, makes me look like a fool and he wins the first Saturday in May. I don't doubt the talent. I just wonder a little bit from a seasoning and an experience standpoint. How's he going to handle 170,000 people going faster than he's ever gone before, at a distance that's longer than he's ever gone?
And on pace figures, his wire win would not put him on the lead here. We would have to be another one who'd be doing something new. I might be willing to take a little bit of a chance if the price gets up 15, 20 to 1. I'm a little more enthusiastic about his chance than you. We're going to talk about this big race at Oaklawn in a minute. But before we get to that, any other horses we haven't discussed yet who you think might be part of this Derby pace, could prove best of speed, stop and go, pop and stop, whatever you want to say? Anything else on the Derby pace before we pivot?
I'll be very curious, and I've gone on record. I didn't love the Florida form for this year specifically. I'm not saying that the horses aren't good, but as far as the other jurisdictions are concerned, I thought Florida and Arkansas were a slight cut below. I will say White Abarrio really has never done anything wrong, and he's not a slow horse early on. I could see a scenario in which he pulls one of the better trips in the race. It's just a matter of, is he good enough to win? He's shown the ability to be forwardly placed in the past. Again, I don't know that I love the form of those races from Gulfstream this year, but at the same time, if you're purely drawing it up from a trip standpoint, I think there's every reason to think White Abarrio could be in a pretty good position as they round the far turn.
Yeah, that's not wrong. I mean, I don't see him necessarily in the top flight, but a horse that shouldn't be too far back. And I mean, he did the Holy Bull and Kentucky Jockey Club, certainly productive races. He is a little bit interesting. Another horse that has the potential to be one of those horses people talk about. The Saffie Joseph runners typically do work pretty well. We'll have more from you on the Derby before it's all said and done, Matt. But let's pivot to talk about the big race at Oaklawn on Saturday. A little bit later in the show, if you're listening on audio, or in a separate video if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to have the NHC champ, David Harrison, currently waiting in the green room. We'll be going over the Keeneland Late Pick 5, but we do have a Grade 1 race on Saturday. It's the Apple Blossom, and this is a race that features a horse we were alluding to before from the Breeders' Cup Distaff, Letruska, facing a short but tough field. Who do you think is going to win?
I mean, she looks loose on the front, doesn't she? I just don't know. My fear would be that nobody goes with her. She waltzes on the front, and that's that. I think the horse that's probably in the, darned if you do, darned if you don't position is Cece. I think she's the one that kind of by default is going to take up the chase. If I'm being honest, I don't think the Azeri was very good. Not only did she sort of idle, she pulled herself up when she made the front, and give her credit for digging back in. I thought it was a terrible race from She Dares the Devil. And purely from an Asmussen standpoint, I think Pauline's Pearl is half the horse that Clairere is. So I'm going to give Clairere a chance. I don't know if the pace dynamic is going to work ideally for her. I thought her comeback race, I know she was on her left lead for the final 16th of a mile. I mean, Rosario, it was basically a morning workout. He never once asked her to run. She had her ears up the whole way. I thought she was just kind of cruising along. And I think it's just a good sign that she could potentially move forward here. She finished 6 lengths faster than anybody else in that run at the fairgrounds. I know she didn't beat much in there, but I think she could be a very, very talented filly this year. And again, maybe the pace dynamic doesn't work to her advantage in here, because Letruska could very well be waltzing on the front. But for me, those are the only two that I want. I want 3 and 2.
And I think your scenario could work if they really decide that CC is just going to take the race to Letruska. And there's really no reason for them not to try that when you think about it. I mean, it's great to have another Grade 1 second or whatever, and it's a nice check, but I don't think that the team CC is showing up there to finish second. So if they decide they want to be super aggressive, it could set up for Clairere. I see it more as that Letruska and CC are going to probably run around there, and I love Clairere, but yeah, I mean, I see it probably coming 2-5, but I can see your 3-2 idea very much as well. Did you have any other thoughts on any of the other stakes at Oaklawn or anywhere around the country on Saturday before I let you get out of here?
No, I mean, taking a look at the 2 mile and an eighth races, one at Keeneland, one at Oaklawn, you've got a giant discrepancy in purses. I mean, if you put the field together, you'd probably have a fantastic race. Not to say that you don't have a couple of good races between the two, but the Ben Ali and the Oaklawn handicap, I don't know that you've got Breeders' Cup Classic kind of horses in there, but you've got some decent runners. Warrant, Dynamic One, those 2 horses are running down at Keeneland. And as far as Oaklawn is concerned, I mean, I suppose Fearless is kind of the headliner in that race, or Idol, one of those 2. Again, I don't know that we're looking at Breeders' Cup Classic contenders, but who knows? It's early on in the season, and with a big performance here, maybe it's a springboard to bigger and better down the road.
It is an unusual thing. I mean, it's $1 million, the Oaklawn handicap, and it's hard to see who isn't showing up in that field if it's 300,000. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And at the same time, it speaks to, and they are a sponsor, so it may be a biased statement here, but it speaks to the power of Keeneland and what it means to connections to win at the Keeneland meet when they're willing to run horses that would look fantastic for $1 million for so much less at Keeneland. But, you win in the backyard. And I think it's pretty clear, if you're really in the horse racing business, winning stakes races at Keeneland means something more than money. That's part of what it tells me as well.
Yeah, no question about it. And to your point, I mean, some of those horses at Oaklawn at Keeneland would fit in very well for 3 times the price at Oaklawn. And instead they're gonna hang home in Lexington and get the job done there. We'll find out. Again, this is probably a springboard to, you would think if you have good performances from either of these races, you would think races like the Suburban at Belmont out at 1.25 miles, you would think the Whitney over the summer at Saratoga. But first things first, you got to get through these races this weekend.
Matt, thank you so much for your time today. Obviously, we'll have you back on very soon. And we will be back right after this.